The silence in the banquet hall at the Royal York stretched so thin I could hear the ice settling in the champagne buckets. I stood near the head table in a charcoal suit I'd owned for 19 years, the one my late wife picked out at a Moores in Mississauga the winter before the diagnosis. My daughter's wedding reception had been running for 43 minutes when her new husband, Trevor, placed his hand on my shoulder with the kind of grip a man uses when he wants to make sure everyone sees him touching you. He steered me toward a tall, silver-haired woman, holding a flute of Veuve Clicquot, and with a laugh that was already half a sneer, he said, "Margaret, I'd like you to meet Harold, Claire's dad. Don't worry, he's harmless. Used to fix boilers up in Sudbury before the back went. He's been, let's say, between opportunities for a while now." Margaret Lansing, the CEO of the firm where Trevor worked, looked at me the way people in that room looked at the coat check girl. Polite, brief, already moving on. "My name is Harold Whitaker. I am 67 years old. I live in a cedar-sided bungalow on a quiet lake outside Bracebridge, Ontario, where I drive a 2008 Ford Ranger with a cracked taillight I keep meaning to fix. I brew my own coffee, split my own firewood, and I have not worn a tie in 11 years except for funerals and, apparently, this." What Trevor did not know, what my daughter Claire no longer remembered if she ever really knew, was that I was also the founder and majority shareholder of Whitaker Northern Holdings, a private company headquartered in a plain office building on Bay Street that owned 23% of the commercial timber rights north of Sault Ste. Marie, 2 specialty steel mills in Hamilton, and a logistics operation that moved freight from Thunder Bay to Halifax. I did not advertise this. I did not live like it. My late wife Eleanor and I had agreed, back when Claire was 6 and pulling pine cones apart on the dock, that we would not raise a child who measured people by their shoes. That promise had cost me more than Eleanor ever could have guessed. I should tell you how we got to that ballroom. Claire met Trevor 2.5 years ago at a networking event in downtown Toronto. He was 34, assistant vice president of client relations at Lansing Capital, a mid-sized private equity firm that liked to photograph itself more than it liked to deliver returns. He drove a leased BMW he could not really afford, lived in a Liberty Village condo with a view he mentioned to strangers, and treated Claire like a trophy from the first dinner. Claire was 31, a bright, kind-hearted woman who had graduated from Queen's with a degree in public health and was working at a nonprofit in Parkdale that helped new mothers access prenatal care. She was her mother's daughter. She was also, I began to notice, becoming someone else. At first it was small things. She stopped calling me on Sunday nights. When I drove down to Toronto for her birthday that first year, Trevor opened the condo door, glanced at my barn jacket and work boots, and asked if I'd like to leave them by the mat, please. The floors are new. During dinner, he made 3 separate jokes about small-town people, each one landing a little harder than the last. Claire laughed. Not the laugh she had as a child. A borrowed laugh. One I'd never heard from her before. By the second year, Claire had moved into the condo. By the time they got engaged last spring, she had quit the nonprofit. Trevor told me, with Claire sitting beside him nodding, that it was time for her to focus on building a real life. She took a job as an event coordinator at a boutique firm run by one of Trevor's university friends. She got her teeth whitened. She started wearing shoes that cost more than my monthly hydro bill. And she started looking at me, her father, the way Trevor did. I showed up to the engagement party at a restaurant on King Street West, carrying a wrapped gift, a first edition of the Margaret Lawrence novel Eleanor used to read aloud to Claire during the summers at the lake. Trevor opened it in front of the assembled guests and said, "Oh, a used book. That's sweet, Harold. Very on brand for you." He laughed. A few of his friends laughed. Claire's cheeks went pink, and she said nothing. That was the night I understood something was deeply wrong. Not with Trevor. Trevor was what he was. With my daughter. And still, I came to the wedding. Of course I came. She was Eleanor's daughter. She was my daughter. And I had promised Eleanor, on a hospital bed in Toronto General in the January of 2014, that I would never close a door on Claire no matter what she walked through it with. So there I was at the Royal York on a Saturday evening in September, having just been introduced to the CEO of my son-in-law's firm as a broken-down boiler man from Sudbury. Margaret Lansing gave me a half-smile and said, "Well, that's lovely, Harold. Enjoy yourself tonight." She turned back to Trevor, who launched into a story about a client acquisition I was fairly certain was half invented. I drifted away toward the bar and ordered a Canadian club and ginger. The bartender, a young man with a name tag that said Devon, poured it with a heavier hand than the occasion warranted. He'd seen the whole thing. "On the house, sir," he said quietly. "That's kind of you, son. My grandfather was a millwright in Hamilton," he said. "He raised 4 kids on that job. I don't like how your son-in-law was talking." I thanked him and carried my drink to a side table near the windows that looked out over Front Street. I watched Claire across the room in her mother's altered wedding dress, laughing at something Trevor was saying to a table of his colleagues, and I felt a grief so clean and so specific it was almost peaceful. I had already lost her. I had been losing her for 2 years. Tonight was simply the paperwork. What happened next I did not plan. I want that on the record. My wife had been gone 11 years, and I had built a life of deliberate smallness in the North because grief and wealth do not mix well, and I had enough of both. I did not come to that ballroom to teach anyone a lesson. I came to watch my daughter get married and then drive home. But I had also, 3 weeks earlier, received a phone call from a man named Raymond Chu, who ran a diligence firm I sometimes retained when one of my subsidiaries was considering a partnership. Raymond had done a quiet background check on Lansing Capital at my request, not because of Trevor, but because 2 months before the wedding I had overheard Trevor on the balcony of the condo telling someone on the phone, in a voice that had just a little too much whiskey in it, that the old man, Claire's dad, he's sitting on something, I'm telling you. Nobody drives a truck like that by choice. He had been investigating me, quietly, for over a year. What Raymond found about Lansing Capital was more interesting than what Trevor had found about me. The firm was leveraged to the eyebrows. They had taken a large position in a mining venture in northern Quebec that was quietly imploding. Margaret Lansing was looking for an exit, or a rescuer, and 3 of her senior people, including a man named David Prasad, who was Trevor's direct boss, had already been discreetly interviewing elsewhere. Trevor was not a rising star at that firm. Trevor was a passenger on a ship that was listing to starboard, and he did not know it. I had sat on that information for 3 weeks. I had no intention of using it. Knowledge is a heavy thing, and I had made my peace with carrying it quietly. Then, at the reception, about an hour after the Boilerman introduction, Trevor did something that changed my calculations. He was at the head table, a little drunk, talking to Claire, in a voice that carried farther than he realized. I was standing by the dessert table, out of his eye line, reaching for a butter tart. I heard him say, "Babe, listen, just sign the thing on Monday, okay? Your dad is 67, he's alone up there, he's going to have a stroke splitting wood one of these winters. We put the property in a family trust now. We save a fortune later. I've already got the paperwork from Derek." Claire said something I could not hear. Trevor's voice got a little harder. "Because if you don't do it and something happens, the province takes half. Do you want that? After everything you went through with your mom, just sign it. It's a formality." I set the butter tart down on a napkin. I walked out of the ballroom, past the coat check, through the marble lobby, and out onto Front Street. The September air was cool and smelled of exhaust and the lake. I stood on the sidewalk, and I called Raymond Chu. It was 9:40 on a Saturday night. He picked up on the second ring. "Harold, Raymond, the file on Lansing. I want you to send it to Margaret Lansing's personal email by Monday morning, 7 a.m., before she gets to the office. I want her to read it with her coffee." There was a pause. "Harold, are you sure?" "Once that's out, it's out." "I'm sure." "And the other matter? The son-in-law?" "Just the firm for now. I want to see what she does." I hung up. I went back inside. I sat at my assigned table, which Trevor had placed in the corner near the kitchen doors. I ate a piece of salmon that had gone cold. I watched my daughter dance with her new husband under the crystal chandeliers of the Royal York, and I drove home to Bracebridge that night in my Ranger, 4 hours up Highway 400 and then east on 11, arriving at the cabin a little after 3 in the morning. The lake was still. The stars over Muskoka were the stars Eleanor and I had looked at on our first camping trip in 1979. I stood on the dock in my suit pants and my wool coat, and I said, out loud, to no one, "I'm sorry, Elle. I tried." Monday morning, Margaret Lansing opened her email. By Tuesday afternoon, an emergency board meeting had been called at Lansing Capital. By Thursday, David Prasad, Trevor's boss, had been asked to resign, and in his exit conversation with Margaret, he had, in the interest of his severance, offered her a detailed accounting of every corner Trevor had cut in the last 18 months, including a pattern of inflated expense reports, a client relationship where Trevor had accepted what was functionally a kickback from a vendor, and a habit of forwarding confidential client documents to his personal Gmail. None of this had been in Raymond's file. It came out on its own, the way these things do when the lid comes off. Trevor was called into Margaret's office on Friday at 4 in the afternoon. I know it was 4 in the afternoon because Claire called me that night for the first time in 5 weeks, and she was crying so hard I could barely understand her. Dad, they fired him. They fired Trevor. They said he was being investigated for, I don't even understand what they said. Fraud? Dad, they're saying fraud. He's saying it's a setup. He's saying Margaret has it out for him. But Dad, I don't know what to think. I stood in my kitchen in Bracebridge holding the phone. The kettle was whistling. I turned the burner off. Claire, honey, where are you right now? The condo. He went out. He said he needed to drive. Dad, we just spent $70,000 on the wedding. I'm on the mortgage with him. I quit my job for this life. Dad, what do I do? I did not tell her what I knew. Not yet. I told her to lock the door. I told her to pour herself a glass of water and sit on the couch and breathe. I told her I would be at her condo in 4.5 hours. And then I got in the Ranger and I drove. I was in her kitchen by 9 p.m. She had not locked the door. Trevor had not come home. She was sitting on the leather couch he had picked out, still in her work clothes, her hair pulled back, and when I walked in, she stood up and crossed the room and put her head against my shoulder the way she had not done since she was 19, and she cried like she was 6 years old again. I held her. I did not say a word. I let her cry until she was finished. Then I sat her down at the kitchen island, and I made her a cup of tea, red rose, 3 bags, the way Eleanor used to make it when Claire was sick, and I told her the truth. Not all of it, but enough. I told her that Trevor had been looking into my finances for over a year. I told her what I had overheard at the reception about the family trust. I showed her, on my phone, the 3-week-old report from Raymond Chu about Lansing Capital, which I had not sent to her because it was not my business to send until it became my business. I told her that I had forwarded it to Margaret Lansing because I had heard my son-in-law planning to pressure her, my own daughter, into signing documents that would have quietly transferred control of my estate into a vehicle he could access. But Dad, she said, and her voice was very small, you don't have an estate. You have the cabin. You have the truck. I looked at her across the kitchen island, at my daughter, Eleanor's daughter, the girl who had pulled pine cones apart on our dock in the summer of 1993. Sweetheart, I said, sit down. There's something your mother and I decided a long time ago that it's time I told you. I did not tell her the full number. I did not need to. I told her about the company. I told her about the mills and the timber rights and the building on Bay Street. I told her that her mother and I had made a choice, 38 years ago, to live below our means and to raise her without the knowledge, because Eleanor had grown up in a wealthy family in Forest Hill and had watched her own siblings become people she did not like, and she had sworn she would not let that happen to her own child. I told her that the plan had always been, that the money would come to her when she was settled and grounded and whole, that it was all hers, that it had always been hers, that I had simply been its caretaker. Claire stared at me for a long time. Then she said, the book, the engagement party, the Margaret Lawrence, first edition. He called it a used book. Yes, Mom read me that book. She read me that book every summer. I know. She put her face in her hands and she was quiet for a long time. And when she looked up, she was no longer crying. Her eyes were dry, and there was something in them that I had not seen in 2 years. She looked like her mother. Dad, she said, what do I do? What do you want to do? I want him out. I want him out of this condo. I want him out of my life. I want my job back. I want my apartment in Parkdale back. I want, and her voice broke here, just for a second, I want to go up to the cabin for Thanksgiving like we used to. Okay, I said. Then that is what we will do. Trevor came home at 2 in the morning, smelling of gin. He saw me sitting at the kitchen island, and his face did something I will remember for the rest of my life. It was not fear, it was calculation. You could see him reshuffling his cards. Harold, he said, with a smile that did not reach anywhere. Late for a drive up from Sudbury, isn't it? I was never from Sudbury, I said. I was from Kirkland Lake, and I never fixed boilers, and my back is fine. He blinked. I stood up. I was not a large man, and I was not a threatening man, but I had negotiated the acquisition of 2 steel mills across a table from people far harder than Trevor, and I knew how to stand in a room. Trevor, I said, you are not going to contest a thing. You are going to sign the condo over to Claire on Monday. You are going to pack a single suitcase, and you are going to be out of this unit by Sunday night. You are not going to ask her for anything. You are not going to call her. You are not going to text her. If you do, the file Margaret Lansing received on Monday is going to be joined by a second file, and that file is going to Revenue Canada and to the Law Society, because one of your side arrangements involved a legal referral that is going to interest them. Do you understand me? He opened his mouth. Do you understand me, Trevor? He closed his mouth. He nodded. He was out by Sunday at 6 p.m. I would like to tell you that was the end, that Claire moved on, that Trevor disappeared into whatever next city would have him, and that the lesson was clean. It was not. Nothing real ever is. Trevor was charged 11 months later in a case that had nothing to do with me, involving the kickback arrangement David Prasad had described to Margaret. He pleaded out and received 18 months, of which he served 7 at a minimum security facility near Gravenhurst, which is, as you may know, about 40 minutes from my cabin. I did not arrange this. I did not know it was going to happen. When Claire told me, I actually laughed, because sometimes the universe writes better than any of us could. Claire asked me, in the spring after his sentencing, if I would drive her up to visit him. Once. Just once. She had been in therapy for 6 months by then. She had moved back to Parkdale. She had her old job back, with a promotion. She was not the woman in the wedding dress anymore. She was not the woman who had laughed at Trevor's jokes. She was someone new, and also, I thought, someone older, in the way Eleanor had been older than me, even when we were 22. I drove her up on a Tuesday in May. I waited in the parking lot in the Ranger. I watched a red-winged blackbird on a cattail by the fence, and I thought about a lot of things. When Claire came out 45 minutes later, she walked to the truck and got in and shut the door carefully. She sat for a long moment with her hands in her lap. Dad, she said. Yes. I said what I needed to say. I'm not going back. Okay. He tried to ask me about the company, about your company, even now, even there. That was the first thing he asked me. I nodded. I wasted 2 years on a man who only ever saw a door he wanted to walk through. You were young. I was 31, Dad. You were young, I said. Your mother was 36 when she figured out the same thing about her first husband. You remember he existed? No, because she made the choice, and she moved, and she built a life. That's what we do. She was quiet. Then she said, Can we stop at the cabin before I go back to the city? Of course we can. We drove the 40 minutes north. We did not talk much. When we got to the cabin, it was late afternoon, and the lake was that particular Muskoka gold that only happens in May. Claire stood on the dock in her city clothes, and she looked out at the water and she cried, briefly, and then she stopped, and then she took her shoes off and sat down with her feet over the edge, the way she had when she was 6. I stood behind her. I thought about Eleanor. I thought about the promise I had made on that hospital bed 11 years ago. Never close a door. Let her come back through it if she needs to. Let her find her own way, even when it costs you. I thought about Trevor, in a minimum security facility 40 minutes south, learning what kind of man he actually was, which might or might not change him, which was not my problem to solve. And I thought about the thing I had come to understand, slowly, over the long winter after the wedding, which was this. I had spent my whole life believing that love meant protection, that if I loved Claire enough, lived quietly enough, held the inheritance steady enough, I could keep her from the wrong kind of man. But you cannot protect someone out of their own choices. The most you can do is leave the door open, keep the lights on, and be waiting at the kitchen island at 9 p.m. on a Friday in September when they finally come home. Claire lives in Toronto now. She runs a foundation Eleanor would have recognized. The money came to her on her 34th birthday, in an arrangement her mother drew up with a Bay Street lawyer in 2013, and she does not spend it on shoes. She drives a used Subaru. She comes up to the cabin at Thanksgiving and Christmas, and for 2 weeks every August. She is married now, 3 years, to a pediatric nurse named Daniel who builds canoes in his spare time and who asked, the first time he met me, if I needed help with my dock, which was sagging, which he then came back the next weekend and fixed without being asked. I like Daniel very much. I still drive the Ranger. I still split my own firewood. The taillight is still cracked. Some nights in the winter, when the wood stove is going and the lake is frozen solid and the stars over Muskoka are the same stars they have always been, I sit in Eleanor's old reading chair and I think about the silence of that ballroom at the Royal York. The charcoal suit, the half smile of Margaret Lansing, the hand on my shoulder. And I think about how close I came to losing my daughter. Not to Trevor, to the version of herself she would have had to become to stay with him. And I am grateful, in a way that is very hard to explain, that on that September evening, in that gilded room, my son-in-law decided to open his mouth and call me a name. Because if he had not, I might never have known to listen. That is all of it. That is the whole story. The only part I have not told you is the number, and I am not going to, because my wife would not have wanted me to, and because the number was never the point. The point was the door. I kept it open. She walked back through. That is the only ending that ever mattered.